Good morning. Thank you for being here. All right. Do you want to give the federal update, Steve, since you're on the line?
Sure. Thank you very much. So there's a fair amount of activity now this past week on transportation issues. The House Appropriations Committee met yesterday and approved the House version of the fiscal year 2020 appropriations bill. In that bill, there is there's a slight increase for the Federal Transit Administration, $13.5 billion. And that includes not only the formula funds, but it also includes additional money from the general fund for what they're calling transit and infrastructure investment. There's another $750 million. And the way they recommend dividing that up is by adding up or plussing up the grant programs, the competitive grant programs, such as bus and bus facilities, the low and no emission grant program. They also, they do provide, and the rest I should say goes to formula funds. They do provide $2.3 billion for the capital investment grant program, and of that, $431 million will go for small starts. So in the coming fiscal year, which obviously starts on October 1st, under the House bill, there will be quite a bit of money for small starts programs, which is good news certainly for PSTA. I'll just say that looking ahead, the Senate does not have a schedule yet for how it's going to consider its version of the 2020 appropriations bills. We expect that they will start marking up probably in July, maybe late June. The holdup for them is that there is still no agreement between the House and the Senate and the President about what the top line amount that should be spent for the federal government. There's no agreement on that yet. So they're working on that. Leadership is working on that. And once they reach an agreement on that, that will help them. They'll then divide that money up among all the different appropriations bills, and they'll be able to go ahead and start that process in the Senate. Nothing new to report on an infrastructure bill. That seems to be dead for the year. The focus is again on the FAST Act reauthorization and trying to increase the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund. That is important because the projections are now that at the end of September of next year, the transit account in the Highway Trust Fund will be essentially at zero. And so looking ahead, if they're going to try to pass more legislation next year on to extend the highway and transit programs, they need to raise revenue or find other sources of revenue outside of the federal gas tax. I know an issue that you may want to just, I'm happy to answer questions about, but there's been obviously a great deal of concern at PSTA and in the Tampa Bay region about driver safety. And that's an issue I'm happy to talk about, but I'll let you ask questions about it because that may be a little more relevant to what your concerns are.
Well, first of all, I understand that there are a lot of congressmen that have signed on to the federal piece of legislation regarding drivers. You know, Fred is pointing out, yes, it's HR 1139, and in my conversation with Congressman Chris, he indicated that he absolutely was signing on to that bill. Do you know if he has yet?
I will tell you in a moment. I've not heard directly from him, from their office. Yes, he has. I'm sorry for the delay, but on May 30th, he became a co-sponsor.
Excellent, excellent. So is there anyone else in our Tampa Bay delegation, anybody else that has not yet signed on to it, like Bill Arakis or?
Kathy Castor has, she is a co-sponsor as well. I'm looking to the list. I will let, how about if I let staff know if there is anyone else so they can communicate that with you?
That would be excellent because then we can lean on them for from our end. And at our meeting, Steve, we had transit folks from not only Pinellas and Hillsborough, but from Pasco and Manatee as well. So make sure that when you're looking at the list, you're looking at the comprehensive Tampa Bay regional list of congressional people, because obviously their folks are impacted as well.
Will do. Will do.
Excellent. Okay, go forward. Anybody else?
Well, the only other thing, I'll just add very quickly, the only other thing, and it's obviously not as important as the transportation appropriations bill, but the House today in subcommittee is taking the Homeland Security bill up. The bill does have $100 million in it for transit security grants. That is a continuation of the same program level. So that is administered by FEMA. So at least there's a continuation of the ability to access those funds should we need it.
Excellent. And one of our committee members, Commissioner Johnson, has joined us. And do you want to talk about transportation disadvantaged funds, Patty?
Only the fact that we have to, our area, as some people will remember, is a little bit older than other areas of Florida because everyone came here and decided this is where they would retire. Well, they've retired and they've gotten older and they're getting older, and we need more money in transportation disadvantage. Everyone talks about it, but it doesn't happen. So if there is anything out there that you can send our way or tell us to ask for, we would really appreciate it. We have the programs that would provide, we just don't have the money to give them to do the providing. So
Yeah,
I would appreciate
yeah.
anything.
I'll only add that there's no direct funding from the Federal Transit Administration or the Department of Transportation. We have been trying to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to identify some funding sources that could be used for elderly transportation. But short of paratransit funding, there really isn't a separate program for that.
Thank you for that information. Hold on just a minute, Brad. Commissioner, you have anything? Do you have anything, Commissioner? No? Okay, Brad.
Steve, this is Brad. Going back to your the Homeland Security funding, I guess we've had a question here, or we've been told that these bus driver safety barriers or other capital improvements to improve safety of transit employees would not qualify for those funds because they don't meet the definition, or the Homeland Security Department's definition of security. So I don't know if there's any, nationwide awareness of this now with this unfortunate incident, that maybe, I don't know, maybe that definition could be looked at. I guess there's, a blurred line between the definition of what's safety and what is security, but at least what we're being told is that we would not be able, it is unlikely that they would fund any kind of capital improvements for the safety of transit employees, because it's not security. I don't know.
I think that's accurate. I haven't looked at the program in terms of the eligibility, in a while, but I do think it's primarily been aimed at planning and procedures. I'm looking at the the FEMA website right now. It's planning procedures and life cycle replacement of equipment. Yeah. So, I think your statement is correct, though.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Steve, for the good of the order here?
No, I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that's all I have today.
Okay.
Commissioner,
Yeah.
on our agenda, there were 2 action items, including the minutes and then also the contracts. And not that Ron and Steve are working by the minute, but maybe we could approve renewing their contracts or recommending their contracts, and while Steve's on the phone. And
Okay, can you hang with us for a few more minutes, Steve?
Absolutely.
And by the way, did I hear anybody else get on the phone while he was giving his report?
Alan's on.
Hey, Commissioner. Yeah, I joined about 5 minutes late. Sorry, I was on another call trying to get off. I've been on since Steve was talking.
Okay, we will forgive you this time. Don't let it happen again.
1:30 is all I'm allowed, I guess.
Okay, so may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And second?
Second.
Second, okay, been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so how about we take up the federal lobbyist contract first to see what we want to do with that? Do you want to talk about it, or?
Yeah, so I'll let Al explain it. Again, this is an action item for the committee to recommend renewal of our existing contracts that the board has approved for both our federal and state government affairs consultants. The board typically authorizes the CEO to exercise option years on contracts, but in the case of both the federal and state lobbyists contracts for PSTA, the board asked that the board get to approve each option year.
Good morning, Madam Chair,
Morning.
members of the board. I'm Al Burns, Director of Procurement. Last month, I presented, thanks for allowing me to be here at the Legislative Committee. I normally don't attend this one. Last month at the Finance Committee, I presented these two action items, and it was determined that it was more appropriate that this be brought before the Legislative Committee versus being moved on at that Finance Committee. As Brad said, we have two contracts that I'm going to be speaking to you about this morning. One is for the federal lobbyists, and the other one is for the state lobbyists. I'd like to start with the federal lobbyists, as that one, I'm asking for authorization to exercise the final year. So, to say it a different way, this is the last option that's on this contract, and the contract expires approximately this time next year, or June next year. As you know, the federal lobbyist helps us with federal transportation initiatives before Congress, the Senate, FTA, and other federal entities. In 2015, the board approved a contract with Vanscoy Associates for a 3-year base contract with 2 one-year options. As Brad said, and I apologize for the redundancy, the board did not authorize him to exercise the options. The board said we want to see this before any options are exercised. The current, as I said, this is to exercise the period, and the contract expires in June 2020. The fee per month is $7,000 and will remain unchanged for this renewal term. The recommendation: extend the contract with Vanscoy Associates for the second option year. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Questions?
Yes.
Commissioner Justice?
So this year, I just wanted to make sure, this is we had a 3-year with the 2 1-years, so a total of 5-year.
It was a total of, yes, sir, it was a total of 5 years.
Do we have in our rules as far as certain timeline before we go out for RFP or out, for that kind of thing on these type of contracts?
On these type of contracts, it's typically we do 5 years, but there's no written rule that, a certain limit of time, a certain limit be on the term of the contract.
Okay. Very good. Madam Chair, I would move that we recommend to the full board the renewal for this final year of their 5-year option.
Second.
Okay, now we are in discussion, and I have a couple of points that I would, are you listening, Steve?
I am, yes,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Our next board meeting is, what is the date, Brad?
June 26th? Or, June 26th.
June 25th is our next.
26.
25 or 26?
6.
26.
26.
June 26th is our next board meeting. I think it would be wise, Steve, since if I'm correct, this would be the last time we could renew this contract under this current thing we're working under.
Yeah.
Perhaps it would be wise if you could give us a summary document. It doesn't have to be, 5 pages long, but just a high-level summary document about the accomplishments that PSTA has had at the federal level since we've been working with Van Scoyac. I think that would be very helpful for the board. Number one.
Okay.
Number one.
Happy to do that.
Okay, and then I do have a number two that I would like to bring up. But before I bring it up, I would like us, if you can hang tight for just a few minutes, I would like us to hear from where we're going with our state contract.
Of course.
And then I'll bring up my point. And I know we have a motion and a second.
No, I just also, I think your points are very well taken. I think, just for the discussion, not necessarily for the June meeting, but what would be really helpful, I mean, we've been around a long time, but I still find it helpful, we have new members, is if at some point during the next year, Van Scoyac could do kind of a federal funding 101 for the board, to just talk about how the federal government funds transportation, real basic 101. That helps us when we go through the year and we're hearing about the different sandbox and this grant and that grant, and it just, I think, would be helpful for all of us.
And that's a really great point I think Commissioner Justice just made. For those of us that are on Forward Pinellas, we have an opportunity to go to the MPO Funding Institute, and you learn about all the different pots and how they can be accessed and what the criteria is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's very informative, and I think it would almost benefit us, now that you're also representing T-BARDA, if at the time we do that workshop, we invited them to participate as well, since they're a fairly new agency. I know the CEO is very knowledgeable about these kind of things, but their legislative committee folks are just, it's like writing on a blank page, because a lot of them are gubernatorial appointments and they've never worked in the bowels of a big government agency like the federal transit folks. And so, don't you think that would be helpful, Debbie?
It would be very good.
I think you'd like it as well, right? Just a primer for what you already know. Yeah. Is that all right with you, Steve?
Absolutely. I think it's a great suggestion.
Well, it's Commissioner Justice. What else could we expect?
And I'll add, anytime that you would like to have that, we're happy to be to come down, and both Terry and I will be happy to do that with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, and so Ron, do you want to lead us, or Brad, who wants to lead us in the next contract discussion?
Madam Chair, if I could be so bold.
Okay, of course, please.
The next action item is in regard to the state government relations contract. As you know, the state lobbyists provide representation regarding PSTA transit initiatives and issues before the state legislator, FDOT, and other related interests. In 2016, the board approved a contract with RSA Consulting for a 2-year with three one-year periods for the state lobbyist services. Once again, the board did not allow the CEO to exercise options on this contract. The fiscal impact on this is $8,000 per month for the second option year, which we're I'm asking for approval today. The recommendation: extend the contract with RSA Consulting Group LLC for the second option year. If there's any questions on this, I'd be more than happy to field.
Any questions from our board members?
No question, but I would, my thought on the federal funding 101, I think would be great for a state funding 101 as well.
Yeah.
Is that all right with you?
Be happy to
Ron?
do it, yes.
Okay, okay, so that's number one. Number two, I would like to point out for the committee members, because I know at least one of you weren't here last time, we put a tight rope around Ron and his team when we hired them initially, just because we were moving from a firm we had had for many years into brand new territory, and we wanted to see some action and how they would perform and how responsive they would be, since that was a huge issue with our former state advocacy group. And so I think I would like to ask the same thing of you. Ron, that you could provide for the full board a summary of the actions that have been taken since you've come on board with us, and what you see as the accomplishments that you've managed to achieve on behalf of our agency, and where that positions us going forward. If you can get that done between now and the 25th,
No
that'd be
problem.
great. So do we have any other comments or suggestions for what we'd like to see at the full board before we move forward with a motion and a second?
I only have one thing that I would like to.
Please,
Have-
speak up.
In all these years that I've worked in different areas and with lobbyists, I have never, ever had the opportunity to be heard as well as since we've had our state agency, our state lobbyists working with us. You guys are wonderful. I know each one. When we go to their offices, we are treated royally. I appreciate you guys. And I certainly do hope to have the opportunity to say, let's go with this immediately, if not sooner. So, thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Well, I echo your comments, Commissioner, and I think we can say that about both of our teams,
Yeah.
the federal
I do.
level and the state level. They've been extraordinarily receptive to us, and lots of hand-holding and, gnashing of teeth as we moved along, and so it's been.
You said it better.
No, but I mean, it couldn't be, I guess it could be better, but I'm not quite sure unless we get millions and millions of dollars. And,
We're trying.
so can I have a motion and a second on the state contract?
Well, we have a motion and a second hanging out there on the federal.
We do, but I have a.
Typically, you don't do another motion when it's hanging out there, but
All right, well,
I'm
let's,
no parliamentary procedure person.
let's move back to the section, to the first comment that I wanted to make for future reference, or however you want to handle that, Brad. But it doesn't feel right to me that we are paying a larger compensation to our state advocacy group than we are to our federal advocacy group. And I would like to have the staff have a discussion about that. Clearly, for those of us that have been to Washington, that is a much larger body to get things done in than it is at the state level, I think. I can be fair in saying that. And that we ought to take some of the work that's being done into consideration as we move forward. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, Madam Chair.
So noted.
Okay? I mean, fair is fair, and I think that's an issue that needs to be worked on a little bit going forward. So with that said, all in favor?
Aye.
Now, do we have a motion and a second on the state contract? Is that okay?
Charlie.
It's okay with me.
Just checking, Mr. Parliamentarian Robert's Rules of Order person.
Those rules and laws are pesky things, aren't they?
Yes, they can be, especially with you in the seat there. That's okay, keep us on the straight and narrow.
I'll make a motion that we continue with our, or, what am I saying, Charlie?
I think
I want to move. to-
Councilmember Johnson would like to move that we recommend to the full board the renewal of contract with our state lobbying agency.
Second.
And I will second that motion.
Thank you. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, where's my, that was easy button. Thank you, Steve, for hanging with us.
Absolutely. Could I ask, since you recognize me one more time, just a quick question, and I can certainly work with Brad on this. Just let us know when you need this summary of accomplishments by, so you have it in time to process for the board meeting.
Okay.
Brad, you and Brad will talk about that, I'm assuming. Same with Ron for
Okay.
his report.
Yeah.
Sounds good, thank you.
Can I have one more?
Commissioner Johnson has one more thing she'd like to say.
In my last meeting, One of the things that was brought up by our board, which is transportation disadvantaged, is that the Older Americans Act and the person who represents that entity was there, that there is some money for transportation, and we might be able to work through the Older Americans Act to try to get some more for our elderly transportation disadvantaged.
All right, thank you very much. I'm happy to look into that, and certainly we'll get back to the staff, and if there are opportunities, we'll work with you to try to secure that money.
And speaking of elderly folks, I am so proud to announce that yesterday we found out in our county commission meeting that Pinellas County has achieved the final checkoff on our effort to be an age-friendly county.
Oh.
How about that?
Yay!
Oh, you're getting older too. I think my feet are up here. Okay, thank you, Steve.
I heard Charlie say
Thank you.
thank you all the way over here.
Look at his face.
So, also, speaking of Old Americans Act, I would suggest either Mr. Miller or the appropriate person on your staff get together with Anne Marie Winter at the Area Agency on Aging of Pasco Pinellas, because there's probably some partnerships that are available there, and so that we're all sure about funding streams and that kind of thing.
And that was where
Great
that came
idea.
from.
Did you hear that, Steve?
I did, yes.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay. We're good. Phew, got that done. Okay, future meeting subjects.
Well,
We haven't had our
we need our state
state
update
update
now.
yet.
We need our what?
State update.
Oh, but that,
It's not listed there, I'm
it's
sorry.
not listed there. I thought we were gonna
Yeah.
gloss right over you.
Madam Chair, and I can be
Just
pretty,
kidding.
I can be pretty brief. Number one, you have the handout that we gave out to the full board last week, kind of the summary of some accomplishments during session we wanted to share with you. The governor still does not have the budget, by the way.
What?
We expect him to get it this week, and more importantly, we expect the governor to act relatively quick. We know that he's already decided, I think, on what he's going to veto or not veto. It's just a matter of him getting the budget at this point. There's actually, believe it or not, going into this morning, the governor has over 100 bills that he has not received. We expect him to receive the majority of those bills in pretty large batches starting today. Since we've been sitting here, that there was actually batches sent to him, which does not include the budget, by the way. So, but we would expect the budget to be included. The good news is, from a funding from T-BARTA perspective, we still think we're in very good posture there, and would expect that it would be a part of the budget once he approves it. We do not believe it's going to be vetoed.
What's the holdup getting all the stuff?
He's been in Israel for all of last week.
Oh, gee, I forgot.
And they didn't want to send a bunch of bills to him and look like he was acting upon them, and he was not on U.S. soil. So they've been holding all the bills until he's back. And again, I think you'll start seeing a number of those bills being released this week.
Excellent.
So from a kind of looking ahead from an agenda standpoint, and I mentioned this at the board meeting, let's remind all of ourselves, the session starts early. Session starts on January the 14th. Committee weeks start in September. I would recommend to you as a committee that we need to have our agenda for final approval from you to go to the board in September. My recommendation, Madam Chair, would be this, is number one, not to meet in July. I think July is a difficult month to get a quorum anyways. So in July, potentially have a meeting, allow us to work with Brad and his team on beginning to put together a draft agenda that we could bring back to you at your August meeting. At your August meeting, you all, for the first time as a committee, would be able to discuss a draft agenda, be able to either take some things off, put some things on. We would then come back with some final recommendations and a final agenda for your approval as a committee in September, for full board approval in September as well. The September committee week, not a lot's gonna be going on anyway, so I think if you have your final agenda approved by the end of September, that gives us October, November, December to kind of work that with legislators back home before they get, into session, but also for our Tallahassee trips, which we want to do 2 trips again. Do 1 trip I would recommend during one of the committee weeks, and also do 1 trip actually during one of the weeks during session, probably sometime in January I'd recommend. From a content standpoint, Remember last year, we had two agendas. We had our agenda and a T-BARTA agenda that we supported. I think that would be probably something we would want to do again. T-BARTA funding is going to happen again. Remember, all the dollars they received this year, the 2.5 million is all non-recurring. So they're going to have to go back next year and try to get some recurring dollars. T-BARTA is also looking at some potential statutory changes, which I know as the legislative T-BARTA, Madam Chair, you'll be working with them on what does that look like.
Well, you talk really fast.
I do, yes, ma'am.
They don't see you coming, do they? You indicated, are you anticipating there will be additional changes than what we tried to pursue this year?
My understanding, from talking to David, there may be some, other cleanup languages needed in there relating to our committees and a few other things. Nothing that's major, nothing that I think is changing the governance model of T-BARTA. I think it's just some things that need to be cleaned up that's hanging out there.
Like what?
I've been told some of the committee structure.
Did the efforts to get the mayors to have a proxy and the other things that,
It did not.
none of that passed?
No, sir.
Okay,
So there,
well-
there's two, and really, I think, and this is a T-BARTA decision, they need to decide is, A, do you try to do an amendment to do, those and a couple other small things you're trying to do, or do you just do a standalone bill as a general bill? It's not a local, but it'd be a general bill that would open up their enabling act to change a couple of other small things that just need to be revised. Obviously, T-BARTA funding, transportation disadvantage funding. Again, the proviso language that's been in there the last couple of years was not included, so there was a reduction in overall funding this year for Pinellas County because of that. I think that's something we're gonna wanna revisit next year.
Say that again, I did,
The transportation disadvantage funding, there was a formula that was advantageous for us and other counties. This year, that language, that proviso language was not included. It was a last minute change for it not to be included. They went back to a previous formula.
do we know why?
Yes.
I think it was advantageous to South Florida, the new formula.
I'm
It went to
tired of that.
Miami.
What?
It went to Miami.
The old formula that they reverted back to netted South Florida some millions of dollars more, and most of the rest of the state went down.
And we've had conversations with the chairs of those respective committees. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure they realized that was happening. And I'll let Alan, you can jump in here at any time. I know that Senator Hudson, he was unaware that this impacted his district as well. And I know Alan and I have already talked to him. So Alan?
Yeah, no, just to add to what Ron said, that's kind of the point. So last minute leadership, when the budget gets bumped to the leadership level, a leadership decision was made in those negotiations to go back to the old formula. The Senate didn't really push back, and in conversations with Senator Hudson, it was really because they didn't understand the implication. Obviously, the House had a motive for doing it, and the Senate didn't really understand how it applied to everyone. That it was beneficial to Miami, but that it hurt the rest, certain areas throughout the rest of the state. They didn't understand the impact. Now they do. As Ron said, he and I have both talked. This impacted Senator Hudson's district, who is the chair of the TED committee in the Senate, quite frankly, more so than it even did us in certain ways. And so I think that next year, this will be something that will be remedied. So we'll have a 1 year, we'll have an issue this year. There's nothing, the budget's going to be done. But now I think they understand the impact, and I think there's even some conversation about, some more concrete changes going forward instead of having to have this battle every year. What's a different way of looking at it, just kind of permanently going forward? Because I think we have we actually have more champions on this issue now than we did before, which will not, which isn't great this year because we're gonna take a little hit, but in future years, I think this is going to help us especially with Senate leadership and understanding why this formula is so important and why we ask for it every year.
Okay, so and where is the Speaker of the House from?
That would be Miami.
Uh-huh. Need I say more? However,
Right.
let me tell you that we've been working on a strategy in Pinellas County, along with Hillsborough and Pasco, I'm not sure I've shared this with you, Ron. Maybe I did, I don't know. Anyways, because we have an opportunity to begin to act more like a region than we ever have before, especially given the work that's going on with T-BARTA right now. And so there's a group that's working on having I don't know if you remember, well, Alan, I think you guys just haven't been around long enough, but they used to do this thing called Pinellas Day. And you know how they always do Broward or whatever, or Tampa does their thing with their Cuban sandwiches in the courtyard. So anyway, the long and short of it is, we're trying to put together, and we're working towards putting together a big delegation that represents Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough, and all go to Tallahassee on the same couple of days with a very focused itinerary to speak to all of those 3 delegations. And in strength, there's a lot of good things that can happen. The reason Broward, Dade, Palm Beach are so successful is they do that every single year, and when they combine their delegations, it's a lot of elected officials. So, what do you think?
I think it's great. I mean, and look, everybody's doing their individual days currently. I mean, Pasco has their day, Hillsborough have their day, and apparently I guess Pinellas isn't doing anything. I think St. Pete has something.
St. Pete has one.
Some of the individual chambers do the
Yeah.
Pinellas
Like
Park
they'll
Chamber,
take
St.
their
Pete
leadership,
Chamber.
and they'll take their leadership classes up as a part of that.
Right.
Yeah, so, there's a date already set, and now I've forgotten it because I'm trying to talk about it, but I'll find out.
We just need to make sure that's being communicated with the Hillsborough days and the Pasco County days to
Well,
make sure we're trying to.
supposedly it is, so it surprises me to hear you say they're all doing their own independent thing.
Well, they have been to this point.
Yes, I know they
Yeah.
have been. That's why the move is to combine everything and try to do it all on the same day. They can still do their own thing, but we can still set up a event or two that combines everybody together.
Okay.
You mean specifically for transportation issues? or-
Anything that's regional. Could be transportation,
Yeah.
could be infrastructure, could be water. We're all surrounded by the bay.
I know you don't have the
Yeah,
date off
Commissioner,
the month.
Hey, Commissioner, it's Alan. I just
Yeah.
want to add, obviously, I think most people in the room know this, but I think your timing couldn't be better with that idea. I mean, we just talked about where the speaker's from, and everyone, please keep in mind that, one more session under Speaker Oliva, and then the next 2 years after that, the Speaker of the Florida House will be Chris Sprouse, who has, obviously a direct interest in not only Pinellas County, but the region, and someone that we have great relationships with, the board, you all on the other end of this call have great relationships with. So I think showing that regional force and regional impact will only empower him more to do larger, projects of regional impact. And so I think your timing couldn't be better, and I think it will help him to accomplish some of the things that he already wants to accomplish in working with us. So
Especially
I
with
think that's
Simpson
great.
being from Pasco.
Yeah, and Ron just pointed out that Will Simpson is from Pasco, so that's helpful as well. Right?
Yeah, that sounds like a
Absolutely.
I
great
just sent a text message to see if I can get the date before we adjourn today to give to you, so.
Madam Chair, the only other thing I would add is under transportation disadvantage, one concern we had going into session this year was that we're gonna modify or change the innovation grant program, which funds our late shift program, which was our number 1 priority. That did not change. So that's something we're gonna have to continue to stay on top of. We'll continue to meet with staff or the Transportation Disadvantage Commission to ensure that that continues to move forward. I also mentioned, and I don't have an answer for you today, in Senate Bill 768, which is a transportation package that passed the Senate. That was President Galvano's number 1 issue, creating those transportation corridors. There's a pot of money that's tucked into that bill. That's $10 million. Transportation, that $10 million can be spent on a variety of different issues. But it does mention the word transportation disadvantage as a part of that. So, and there may be a way to partner with Uber, because TNCs, remember Brad, that's where the TNCs are mentioned, to some innovative and some other ways to spend that $10 million, Uber and Lyft.
Okay.
There may be, so let me look into that, and that may be something that we could partner with Uber or Lyfts of the world to come back and try to get some additional dollars for the county as well.
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
Madam Chair?
Oh, go.
Well, if I can
Go
just
ahead.
maybe, just a little mini, not even a 101, but on the, just some background data, information about the transportation disadvantage funding at the state. So, the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage is under the Florida Department of Transportation. And in its enabling legislation, I'm not exactly knowledgeable of the revenue streams, but there's a transportation disadvantage fund within the state DOT budget that is specifically by a previous legislature, certain revenue, I think dock stamps or something like that, or vehicle registration fees or something, goes into the fund. That fund is not increasing. The revenue stream into transportation disadvantage, the global 55 million or whatever for the whole state, is not increasing. In fact, I heard it was decreasing.
But the only reason it decreased, so if you look at, it did decrease, but the good news is, if you look at the dollars that went into the formula, it's basically year over year the same number. The reason the number decreased was like 4 or 5 million. If you recall, and this was a bad habit, the legislature did not want to do this year. They were actually funding individual projects out of the Transportation Disadvantage Fund, which is why they spent more money the previous year. They did not do that this year. They just put the straight almost 56 million that went straight into the formula. So year over year, the number did decrease, but they didn't fund individual projects out of that pot.
Okay, but I would, to Commissioner Johnson's claim,
Right.
identification that more money is needed.
Absolutely.
It's not really an increasing pot. And then, so
It's
this
been flat for a
this
number of
Miami-Dade
years.
thing was just messing around with the formula. I mean, the negative to Pinellas and Hillsborough and other counties, and the positive to Miami-Dade was just taking the same amount of money and reallocating it based on the formula that advantaged Miami-Dade. So we go back, I don't know, we'll see what happens next year with the overall funding, and then hopefully a reverting to the formula. The really good news, though, is that we started out in January with the executive director of the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage saying we were going to get zero funding for our TD late shift program, our number one priority, and that changed. And I think the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage just met on Monday of this week, and the staff's recommendation was to fund the TD late shift program at its highest level yet. So a very, very positive, and that seems to be a priority now of the legislature, that that they funded innovative programs. I think we're good on that. So that was very positive.
Chairman?
Yes, I apologize. Go ahead.
I understand. I think that locally, very locally, the four of us, the biggest hit in our local funding for our local projects was Neighborly Senior Services. So if you kind of put that in your head, and that's why the area agency is like, oh, we got to find some dollars. So
Yeah.
we all know Neighborly, we've worked with Neighborly, and we have for as many years as we've been on these commissions. I know, it broke my heart.
If
It's
anyone,
just another-
if anybody else has any other ideas on anything that, this is our current year priority list to spark ideas that you might have, but let me know. Let me or Ron know.
Is there a reason why, I mean, it seems,
The yellow is T-BARTA, and the blue on the other side of the page is PSTA,
okay, but then what is this one?
federal. We're gonna change that in the future so they don't look identical.
Ah, I didn't even see that until Charlie just pointed it out.
It's an eye
Thank
test.
you for sitting next to me. So helpful.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
But that kind of blends into the black that's right here, so
I know.
for my eyes, it,
The only good thing is when we're in Tallahassee or Washington DC, I don't bring the other ones. So,
okay, can I, before you, just so I don't forget to tell you this, because
yes.
the date that the courtyard has already been reserved for Hillsborough Day is January 15th, 2020. And they would like to use that as a date for the joint Tampa Bay Legislative Day effort.
Pack your coat,
I'm sorry?
pack your coat.
Yeah.
It will be
Snap my
cold,
coat.
and the wind will be coming right
I
through the
don't-
middle of there.
I have a warm coat. I've been in DC. Hello?
Yeah.
We know
Yeah, one of the downsides of early session is you're doing outside events in the middle of January in the courtyard, so.
Oh, well.
January the 15th is a Wednesday. It's the-
I'd like to think that if, that they have Plan B, and if it's rainy and blustery, we can go to the rooftop in the Capitol, right?
I'm
It's
just being,
inside.
I'm being cold.
It's inside. It'll be fine. We'll work it out. Okay?
That sounds great.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just
The
wanted to-
one thing just for our two county commissioners to just think about over the next month or so, I know you all have a county commission workshop on in July. And at least I know that county commissioners have asked me in the past or brought up at the Seminole St. Pete College Transportation Forum we had back earlier this year, a number of ideas, creative, outside the box, most of which I don't believe our consultants or myself think have much chance in Tallahassee, but lots of ideas by folks here about ways to increase revenue for all kinds of transportation options that the state could do for us. And as you just see, I'm just noting that there's nothing really on our list from last year. And I'm not recommending that they go on the list for next year either necessarily, but,
Well, let's talk about that, Brad, because Commissioner Seal, a couple of meetings ago, you'll remember this, Commissioner Justice, got on this thing about how we never asked Tallahassee to let us increase our millage rate. And my immediate response to her was, excuse me, Madam Chair, have you met our delegation?
right.
Because I did give up being snarky for Lent, so I'm trying to be a lot fun. It hasn't worked out too well yet, but I'm trying. I worry that that is a possibility for them to wipe us right out
I agree.
or do some other nefarious thing. Do you not agree? There's no appetite for any kind of thing that looks like it might raise?
I would let Alan jump in, but my thought would be is under current leadership in Tallahassee, they will not be passing anything that would look like a tax increase or allow local governments the ability to raise their own taxes, or a local government entity to raise their own taxes.
Yeah, I think that would go poorly. I'll just put it that way.
Well, that bill that DeCiglia had didn't keep us from doing our own thing. It just put in place a few roadblocks, which don't seem to be insurmountable. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but if you need, but for them to give you specific authority to raise any type of a tax, whatever you want to call it, even if it's allowing local governments to do that, I just can't imagine they would give local governments the authority to do that at this point.
DeCiglia's was about referendums, we're talking about the millage cap, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're thinking about.
Yeah,
Yeah, those are two different,
yeah.
and is our millage cap under a special act where it would have to be a local bill, or would that?
It's a local bill.
So one senator could kill that, and I think you have one senator who would kill that, so. just guessing.
Yeah, pretty good guess in my mind. So, what was your point?
Well, my point really was, as we try to work with the county and the Fort Pinellas locally, I just want to make sure that the PSTA board has a discussion about all options and, you know, takes a position for a specific legislative agenda, so that when a county commissioner that maybe is not on PSTA says, well, why haven't you asked Tallahassee? And you say, well, we considered that, or we discussed it with our delegation, and we decided it's not appropriate, or, that's all.
Okay, so you're intimately involved in working with the county administrator in Whit Blanton. And I think until such time as the recommendations are ready to come forward to the county commission, I think it could, I don't agree that it's a good idea to bring that up to our board prior to that funding workshop,
Right.
because
I agree.
it's, yeah. Anybody disagree with me? Feel free. If you do. Charlie?
Makes sense.
What?
It makes sense.
Yeah, because everybody will have an opportunity to weigh in at that funding workshop.
Mhm.
And they'll hear all of the work that has been done, because the way I'm hearing it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, it isn't just about transportation. It's a real strategy to address transportation, economic development, and affordable housing. Since if
Right.
you address one of those elements, it impacts all three of them in very big ways, right?
Right.
And isn't all of that information coming forward at that, isn't that what you're
Yes.
working
Yes.
toward with the maps and the data and the da-da-da-da-da? So if your schedule allows, it would be wise, I think, for one of you guys to be at that funding workshop, so that when you start talking to our legislators, you are fully informed about the data, the needs, and the so on and so forth, because they will say they really care about economic development. And they will tell you they understand the need for affordable housing in our communities. It'd be really nice if the actions mirrored what they say,
Yes, ma'am, we'll be there.
don't you think?
Yes, ma'am.
Knowledge is power, isn't that what they say?
Yes.
Right? You agree?
Absolutely.
There you go. Well, that was a really lovely discussion. Thank you,
Yes.
everybody. Okay. Where are we now?
Did, is it your intention to follow the recommendations of our state government affairs professionals and not have a July meeting?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Just, because I wanted to ask, if we don't have an official legislative committee meeting, then in what venue, Brad, would we collectively here have an opportunity to weigh in on our own individual visionary thoughts about what we'd like to see happen?
At the August meeting, because you're not approving the final agenda, at the August meeting, there'd be a draft agenda presented to you from staff and from your state team. At that point, you all would have a chance to have I think, a lengthy discussion, add some things, delete some things. We would then take that discussion, come back and present a final agenda to you at your September meeting, and then board would approve it at the end of September.
So we'd have two more discussions at a committee level and then one at the full board level before.
Which I am fine with that, as long as, Brad, as you work with the staff to flush all this out, you are fully informing our board members at your one-on-one with them. Because given that the strategy and the recommendations move forward the way it looks like they will, that is going to be very strategic. I think we can all agree.
Right.
And so gonna be fundamentally critical that each of our board members are up to speed. And I'll have this discussion with Barry as well, because there are questions or comments being made at our board meetings that lead me to believe everybody doesn't have the same information. And therein is where we can go down a slippery slope, because different people have different perceptions of what the agenda is.
Right, right. So in addition to the one-on-ones that I'll hopefully have with all 15, between now and August, Ron and I discussed also scheduling local, one-on-ones with the delegation around their summer schedules. Between now and when the board would approve this, to try to meet with the local delegation and get their input. And I would welcome, I think we've often had invited board members to come, depending on where they are in the county, where the meeting is, having board members join us to talk directly with the legislators and get their input on what we should be focused on or that sort of thing. So I think a combination of local delegation meetings here in the districts and one-on-ones, plus the 2 committee meetings prior to board adoption will be good.
I think for those meetings, it's critical that it's more of a listening thing for us to hear from them what their ideas might be, than it would be for us to share with them what our strategy is. Because, think about it, they aren't operating from the same position of strength in terms of knowing all the details as some of us are who have been deep in the weeds on working on this stuff. So they will come right out shooting from the hip because they just don't know any different.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that,
Do you not agree with me?
Now, Madam Chair, that's actually what Brad and I talked about, was the entire purpose of the meeting would be give them a quick update, our annual, hey, what we're gonna see in Tallahassee, but spend a little bit more time in the district. Here's a quick kind of summary of some of our successes over the last year, what we're working on, some of the challenges and opportunities we're working through right now. As we head into the 2020 session, want to sit down with you and kind of hear some of your thoughts. Yes, ma'am.
Great minds think alike, don't they? Good?
so listening session with him, but I am going to be meeting with
What was this?
Steve Holmes of TV World. I'm not listening to him, I'm telling him.
Oh, I don't know him. But from everything I've heard, I'm probably happy that I don't, right?
Madam Chair, the only other thing I would have is, happy to space it out, this may be a Brad question or working with staff. When do you want us to present to the full board? You probably want to space this out. I don't know if you want federal to go first on a budget update or kind of a budget process 101.
Yeah.
Or if you want us, just let us know from a board perspective when that may fit in well to one of your agendas. Ideally, I'd like to have, if you could, have us in either some combination, probably September, October, November timeframe.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have that done as we go into session, especially committee weeks are happening. There'll be some budget stuff will start to move. I'd be glad to kind of walk them through that, but just let me know when we can have a about a 15-minute presentation prepared.
Well, I mean, the thing I do feel a little bit strongly about is for those board members who aren't as knowledgeable about appropriations and trust funds and all of that, we probably don't want to do state and federal on the same day.
Right, no, I agree.
That could get mighty
That we're,
confusing.
space them out.
Yeah.
So just let us know, we'll make that happen.
Okay.
I would think maybe state goes first, just because the feds are working yearly on this stuff, and the state is gonna start up.
Sure.
Right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on a roll right now. Charlie said I was making sense.
Unless Congress completely shuts down or the president doesn't approve the budget, so they shut down and Steve has nothing to do, and then he can come down and talk about
Not
it.
mine.
Dude, you know what? That was horrible karma you just put out in the universe. Take it right back quickly. That wasn't nice, Brad.
I defend you 100%. We were the ones that were sitting there. Still have egg all over me.
Okay, do we have any other business? It says on here HB 1139, but I think we already talked about that with Steve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one other business that
Okay.
frown.
for it.
Go ahead and frown now, okay?
I'm not frowning, I
You're
just
going-
said go for it.
You're going to.
That's not nice. You know?
What? I was gonna warn you. I would like to see us work on some legislation to assist the 7 cities that do not want to participate with us to do so.
Okay, you're right, I don't,
See?
let's just tap that down for the moment, and let's see.
I don't want us to be too late, Janet. We have to do it now.
Hold on. How about we let our strategy evolve? And then we can have that discussion. We have to fix our basic issue
Yeah.
that we have, and all of that is on the table.
What table where?
The county workship and
On
the
July
county
18th.
commission, which would have to act, which would be the body that would vote on the member cities issue. It's definitely on there. on the
Brad,
leadership.
I cannot talk to her about these issues. Would you please explain
Yeah.
to her the importance of strategic?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I get it, you're not the only one that feels that way. I get it.
Everybody.
To cure that, though, it has existed for a very long time. It takes some real heavy lifting. And you don't want all those votes. You haven't been to a St. Pete Beach meeting, have you? Do you see?
Furthermore, Janet, my father was on the St. Pete Beach Commission that
Oh.
actually joined St. Pete Beach, Bella Vista, Vina Del Mar, and Paso Grill. My father was back there. That's
How
when
many
it was all
years ago
joined.
was that?
50,
50 years ago.
55.
So,
So Janet, I am mortally wounded that one subset of people would do this. I am just killed. I grew up on St. Pete Beach. I caught the bus every Saturday morning to go downtown and have lunch at Moss Brothers in the Gold Room. I have done this for how many years? 55 years. And all of a sudden, they're too good. I'm
It isn't
sorry,
all of a
I
sudden.
am mortally wounded.
okay, number one, it is not all of a sudden. Number two, may I please respectfully ask you, when was the last time you went to a city council meeting in St. Pete Beach to speak?
Not to speak.
I rest my case.
I think didn't you come
Yeah,
up
I
with one?
did,
Yeah.
yes.
You spoke at the public
No,
meeting?
I did not open my mouth.
Mhm. A lot of things have changed in the last 50 years, and a lot
Oh,
of folks
no,
have found.
I'm talking about in the last year.
Okay, but Patty, the thing I'm trying to share with you is the folks there have found their piece of paradise, and they don't want anybody else to have it. And my comment to the mayor was, listen, I get that there's a huge discrepancy between the residents and the hoteliers and the businesses, but you're a global destination now. That cow has already left the barn. It is not coming back. So, again, I say to you, these meetings are a matter of public record, and we're working very hard to do the right thing for the right reasons for the most amount of people. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of strategy. Whitney, am I wrong?
In addition,
Brad has spoken to this issue as far as the the process of bringing them to be participants with PSTA. There are options, but none of them are simple or easy. And I think that we have to be strategic in what we ask or expect and how we communicate with them because it's just a different group of people.
There are reasons why they are embroiled in multi-million-dollar lawsuits over and over and over.
I understand that, Jen.
We don't want to be in
I'm
that.
telling you, I understand that.
Yes,
Can I ask a related but different question?
of course.
On the future meeting for the general PSTA board, we have the engineer's report for the BRT Central Avenue coming for our June meeting.
Yeah.
Where will be, I'm trying to figure out what our timeline is for the BRT Central Avenue final vote plan, all that. Because it is, as I shared with you and Whitney, that there's a lot more chatter on social media heating up, and to where I have an idea what our timeline is for when this thing is coming in for a final landing.
And also, while you're answering that, can you talk to him about our effort to rebrand BRT to RTS? Whitney, your cheerleader.
So I'll touch on both of those, if I may, is that the first thing that we're doing is on June 11th, we will be presenting a presentation to St. Pete Beach, hopefully, to kind of answer questions that they have about the project and correct some information that a lot of the public has brought to the commission. And hopefully just the main message is to really explain and communicate the value that PSTA brings to the county and to people's lives, and that we are a public service and who we serve, but then also to explain the BRT project in more detail and help them understand on how it does benefit them personally. So that's one thing that we'll be doing. And then on June 13th, the city of St. Pete will be voting on their contributions to the project. So St. Pete City Council on June 13th will be voting on their $4 million for the project. So that will be
$4 million.
That will be a very exciting day. And then as far as the branding goes, we have been in discussions about specifically branding the Central Avenue BRT so that we don't call it the Central Avenue BRT anymore. And we are in the process of really giving it a new name and a personality and a life that people can really get behind and be excited and proud of. So that's something that we are working on to hopefully be able to have easier conversations and communicate the project a little bit easier amongst the public.
And she has a new name. I heard this yesterday.
I mean, there's a name that I like, but we're going to go through a whole process of.
Well, why don't you share it? We'll test it here.
Well, one thing that that I've been saying is that I think that this is a really exciting project for our county, and it's the first of its kind. So I think that it should be really set apart and different. And because we are the Pinellas Sun Coast Transit Authority, we have a very unique opportunity to talk about this service that's going to be running from Tampa Bay to the Gulf of Mexico, from sunrise to sunset, in a very culturally diverse neighborhood and city. And so we really wanted it to be an upbeat, happy, exciting service. So one idea that we came up with was calling it something like the Sun Runner, since it runs from sunrise to sunset. But that's just one idea, but we'll be going through a whole process as far as naming, the logo, the look of the bus and the stations, et cetera.
And then for the PSTA board, the timeline of final approval, because we had a preliminary and then they went out for all the charrettes, and we haven't had a presentation, unless I missed it, we haven't had a presentation since they went out for all the public inputs at the different community centers and churches and things, to come back to us for what the actual design will look like, correct?
Well, so we basically set up the project design and implementation into three phases. Preliminary design, which got us to 30%, final design, and then construction. And so we did have February or March, we had the different display boards and stuff, and we had it at the PSTA meeting and then at different workshops, and that was at 30% design. We've had a lot of discussions with St. Pete Beach and South Pasadena and the city of St. Petersburg. So there's been some modifications between 30 and where we are now, which is somewhere between 30 and 60. We will be at 100% well, this month, on June 26th, the board will be approving, hopefully, it's going to the finance committee first, the final design contract with our 2 engineering consultants to take us all the way to 100% design with Lochner and with HDR. That will be the design then, and another round of outreach on the final design will be toward the end of the summer. And then the hope, although it's certainly pending on what Steve Palmer was discussing in Congress, is then that would set us up for being approved in the next congressional budget for their piece of funding by the end of this calendar year. Once we have that, that's basically it's ready to go. It's ready to go to construction. The board will approve a construction contract, and then in 2020, we'll construct the stations and hopefully be open by the end of 2020 or 2021.
So, as far as the PSTA board approval throughout the process, this month is the contract for financing of the 100% design.
Yeah.
But it's not the actual design. But once we finance the design, I guess I'm just trying to understand where we are as far as what role we play in any of this decision making. And it sounds like June 26th might be our last vote on it.
Well,
I just trying to understand I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, I'm just trying to make sure I know what I'm doing.
Brad, how about you come up with a schedule that, like you just outlined verbally? Can you come up with a sheet that lays
Yes.
that all out? And as you're doing your one-on-ones, share that with everybody, as well as where our, adding in our funding solutions recommendations comes in as well. We need to get everybody up to speed.
Agreed.
Once this starts going, it's gonna move like, wildfire. And once we start talking about it, that's when everybody comes out of the woodwork.
yeah. We'll do. I think one thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to officially invite the PSTA board, based on the discussion we had at the last meeting about board members interested in participating in some of these meetings that are not at PSTA. But we are going to invite board members to join Whitney. One or both meetings next week, July 11th at St. Pete Beach, or July 13th.
June 11th.
I did June 11th at St. Pete Beach, or June 13th, City of St. Petersburg. Depends on, I think, your personality.
We'll be out of town. Conference.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, it's a free country.
Public
It's your
meeting.
option.
But I guess my angst is the way in which we have been received up to this point. I'm not sure that's gonna be a good positive thing for that council to have to deal with, given how they operate. Just saying.
I agree. I hear you, and I agree somewhat. But I know a number of the board members did say that they would be interested in attending. I'm just gonna
I know, I
make sure they
heard
know.
that too, so we'll see. Okay, well, is there anything else that we need to discuss, Brad? We've had quite a robust discussion about did you get all your questions answered, kind of, sort of?
Kind of, and it'll be forthcoming. We
Yeah.
have a one-on-one before the meeting, I just was trying to get it in my head, so.
Yeah. I appreciate your due diligence, even though I joke with you, you know I.
You didn't like the other suggestion for the name for the Central Avenue,
Which one?
the Rapid Area Transit?
Oh, the rapid transit service?
He even has a logo. He has a logo.
Hey,
Well, the
listen, by
rapid-
the time we get ready to make our final decision, he will have an entire presentation
I know.
on the way it should look.
He already
Trust me
does.
when I tell you. Okay. His ideas are usually very good.
Even if you never take them?
Charlie, that is not, do not make me, I'm sitting right next to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything else? You've been so quiet. You have to cut that out. You're here for a reason.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think we've completed our mission today. Yes? Okay. Then we are adjourned. I don't know if my gavel.
Did you just see the logo?
Oh my God, he's-
1:30, and then I can do the
Yeah.
1:30 to 2, and go to the 2:30 transportation.
Show that to Whitney.
Oh,
She's
he's-
seen it.
He's sent it
She'll
to me.
drum
Did you
it.
change it on the calendar? Were we out of town?
I don't know, I think
No,
you
we're
want
back.
someone to do it.
The rat.
He's got like a running.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, Alan. Goodbye, goodbye.
So you told me David
I'm
Cruz.
just-
the
I
architect-
was very creative.
Well, I was thinking about the wheels